Penniless cleaner hired to work at Millionaire's mansion while he's in a coma. You won't believe what happened when she kissed him. Comment giving my story a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The rain lashed violently against the windows of the small apartment when the 30-year-old woman received the call that would change her life forever. Her hands trembled as she held the phone, listening to the words that echoed like a hammer in her chest. Terminated for cause, accused of theft. Her jealous co-worker had planted an expensive piece of jewelry in her purse, and now everything was collapsing like a house of cards. She looked around the modest one-bedroom she shared with her young daughter, mentally calculating the bills piling up on the kitchen table. The overdue rent, the payments for her elderly mother's medication, the daycare tuition. Each number was a heavy stone in her stomach, and now, without a job, the future seemed like a bottomless abyss. For 3 days, she walked the streets of the big city looking for work, facing scornful looks and doors that slammed shut before she could even finish her sentences. Her experience as a cleaner seemed worthless, and the few opportunities required references she could no longer provide. With each no she received, she felt smaller, as if the world was conspiring against her. Then she received an unexpected call. A female voice, cold and authoritative, offered a unique opportunity to work as a domestic caregiver in a mansion in the city's exclusive Beverly Hills neighborhood. The salary mentioned made her eyes widen. It was 3 times what she earned at the cleaning company. But there was a strange condition that intrigued her. The job involved caring for a 30-year-old man who had been in a coma for 6 months, the victim of a mysterious car accident. The family wanted someone who, in addition to basic cleaning and organization, would talk to the patient daily. The doctors had suggested that familiar vocal stimuli could aid in his recovery, but the relatives were too busy with the family's business to dedicate themselves to this task. When she arrived at the imposing mansion, surrounded by perfectly manicured lawns and protected by high walls, she felt like an intruder in a world that didn't belong to her. The older woman who greeted her had icy eyes and a smile that didn't reach her face. She was the mother-in-law of the comatose businessman, a woman in her 60s, accustomed to ruling everything around her with an iron fist. "You're not here to meddle where you don't belong," the mother-in-law said in a cutting voice. "Your job is to clean, organize, and talk to my son-in-law, nothing more. The private areas of the house are off-limits to you, and I expect you to understand perfectly what your place is in this family." The room where the businessman lay was on the 2nd floor of the mansion, overlooking the gardens. It was a luxurious setting, with solid wood furniture and expensive paintings on the walls. But what caught her attention the most was the man lying in the adapted hospital bed. Even unconscious, he radiated a magnetic presence that made her uncomfortable. In the first few days, she performed her tasks in silence, meticulously cleaning every corner of the room while observing the medical equipment that monitored the patient's vital signs. Talking to someone who couldn't respond seemed absurd, and she felt ridiculous trying to initiate one-sided dialogues. But the loneliness of the job and the constant pressure from the watchful mother-in-law began to weigh on her shoulders. During the 2nd week, while changing the bedsheets, she muttered a few words about the weather. It was a timid start, almost whispered, as if testing her own courage. Gradually, the conversations became longer and more intimate. She began to talk about her life, her fears, the daughter she was raising alone, and the dreams she had abandoned to survive. She talked about the financial difficulties, about how she felt invisible in society, about the injustice of the accusation that had cost her her previous job. "You probably never went through this," she said, as she organized the medications on the bedside table. "You were born with a silver spoon in your mouth. You've had everything handed to you since you were a child, but maybe it's good for you to hear what life is like on the other side, even if you can't answer me." What she didn't know was that during these initial weeks, the businessman's brother visited the room frequently when she wasn't present. He was an ambitious man of 35, with restless eyes and nervous gestures. He rummaged through papers in the office adjacent to the room, always with an expression of someone carrying heavy secrets. One night, while cleaning the office as part of her extra duties, she noticed that some documents were scattered haphazardly on the desk. It wasn't in her nature to snoop, but a header caught her attention: Vehicle Insurance Report. Curious, and without fully understanding what she was reading, she noticed some inconsistencies in the dates and descriptions of the accident. The storm that hit the mansion the following week brought with it a discovery that would change everything. The power failed during the early hours of the morning, and she had to use a flashlight to check if the emergency medical equipment was working correctly. It was then that she found a folder hidden behind a bookcase, containing documents that revealed a shocking truth about the accident. The documents trembled in her hands as she read each line with growing horror. Detailed mechanical reports showed that the car's brakes had been sabotaged, with precise cuts in the hoses that could only have been made intentionally. Technical photographs revealed evidence that clearly pointed to sabotage, but the official report, filed by the police, classified everything as an accidental mechanical failure. She felt the blood run cold in her veins as she realized the magnitude of what she held in her hands. Someone had tried to murder the businessman, and that same person was probably walking freely through the corridors of the mansion every day. Her hands were clammy as she put the papers back in the exact place where she found them, trying not to leave traces of her discovery. During the following days, she observed every movement of the brother with increased attention. She noticed how he always checked to see if he was alone before entering the office, how his hands trembled slightly when he handled documents near the businessman's bed, how his eyes avoided looking directly at the unconscious face of the brother he had tried to eliminate. "You can't imagine what I've discovered about your family," she whispered to the businessman during her daily conversations, always making sure that no one else could hear. "Your own blood tried to destroy you, and now he walks around the house as if he were a saint. But I'm going to protect you, even if you never know it." The weeks turned into months, and she developed a routine that went far beyond her professional obligations. She brought fresh flowers to the room, chose soft music to play during medical care, and even read excerpts from books she found in his personal library. Each object in the room told a story about who he was before the accident: travel photographs, sports competition trophies, books with handwritten notes in the margins. "You liked adventures," she said, as she flipped through a photo album. "Skydiving, climbing, car racing, always seeking adrenaline, right? Maybe that's why your brother thought an accident would be the perfect way to get rid of you. Who would suspect sabotage when your life has always been full of risks?" The controlling mother-in-law intensified her surveillance, appearing in the room at unexpected times to check on her work. During these inspections, she always made acidic comments about the social difference between them, constantly reminding her what each of their places was in that house. "Don't delude yourself into thinking you're doing something great here," the mother-in-law said during one of these visits. "You're a maid, nothing more. My son-in-law is an important businessman with assets you can't even imagine. When he wakes up, if he wakes up at all, he certainly won't remember just any cleaning lady." But she had developed feelings that went far beyond professional compassion. She admired not only the businessman's physical appearance, but also the personality she was able to perceive through the personal objects and the stories that the old employees told about him. She discovered that he was known for treating employees well, for his discreet generosity to social causes, for being a demanding but fair boss. During a particularly difficult afternoon, when she received the call informing her that her elderly mother would need expensive and urgent surgery, she broke down emotionally in his room. Tears flowed freely as she explained her desperate financial situation, how the generous salary was still not enough to cover all the family's medical needs. "I don't have anyone else in the world besides her," she sobbed, sitting in the chair next to the bed. "And now I need to find a fortune I don't have to save her. Sometimes I think it would be easier if I were like your brother, unscrupulous, capable of doing anything for money. But I can't be like that, even when life pushes me against the wall." It was at this moment of absolute vulnerability that something extraordinary happened. Moved by a desperate need for human connection, by months of one-sided conversations that had created an impossible intimacy, she approached the bed and, in an impulse that surprised her, gently kissed his lips. What happened next defied all medical logic. His eyes slowly opened, focusing with difficulty on her face. For a moment that seemed eternal, they stared at each other in absolute silence. Then, in a hoarse voice, after months of silence, he whispered her name, the same name he had heard hundreds of times during the conversations he thought were just dreams. You've been here all this time?" he asked, struggling to focus his vision and organize confused thoughts that mixed between reality and the fragments of consciousness he had maintained during the coma. Shock completely paralyzed her. She recoiled from the bed as if she had received an electric shock, realizing the enormity of what she had done. Not only had she kissed a patient under her care, but now he was awake and aware of her audacity. Shame consumed her instantly, mixed with an inexplicable joy at finally seeing him awake. I was just... The doctors said to talk," she stammered, trying to explain months of unilateral intimacy in a few incoherent words. But before she could elaborate any coherent explanation, hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway. The mother-in-law had heard voices coming from the room and was running to investigate, followed closely by the ambitious brother, who paled upon hearing the voice he no longer expected to hear. The businessman's awakening would create shockwaves that none of them were prepared to face. The mother-in-law stopped at the door, as if she had seen a ghost, her hands grabbing the doorframe to keep from falling. Behind her, the brother paled even more as he realized that his carefully laid plans were crumbling before his eyes. The businessman was awake, alive, and potentially able to remember details that could destroy everything. "How is it possible?" the mother-in-law murmured, running to the side of the bed with tears in her eyes that mixed genuine relief with concern about the implications of this awakening. The doctors said the chances were minimal after so long. The businessman tried to sit up, but his atrophied muscles protested against the movement. His mind struggled to process the fragmented information that came in like disconnected flashes. He vaguely remembered a comforting female voice, stories about financial difficulties, a young daughter who needed care. His eyes searched for the face of the woman who had retreated to the corner of the room, clearly mortified by the situation. She took care of me," he asked in a still, weak voice, pointing discreetly to the caregiver who was preparing to run out of the room. The mother-in-law cast an icy look in her direction, as if blaming her for some undue interference in the family's destiny. "It was her job," she replied dryly. "Nothing more than that. Now you can leave. Your services are no longer needed." But the businessman, even weakened, maintained the natural authority that had characterized him before the accident. "No," he said with surprising firmness. "She stays. I want to understand what happened during all these months, and apparently she is the only person who can tell me." The brother, who had remained silent near the door, finally approached the bed with a forced smile that deceived no one. His nervous eyes darted between the awakened businessman and the caregiver, quickly calculating how to contain the damage that this unexpected awakening could cause. "Good to see you awake, brother," he said with exaggerated joviality. "We have so much to talk about regarding the business, about the decisions I had to make on your behalf. Fortunately, I managed to keep everything running perfectly during your absence." During the following days, the dynamics of the mansion changed completely. The businessman underwent intensive physical therapy sessions to regain muscle strength, but his mind remained sharp, constantly asking questions about the period in which he had been unconscious. She continued to be present as a caregiver, but now under the even more rigorous surveillance of the mother-in-law, who seemed determined to prevent any kind of approach between them. "You need to understand your position," the mother-in-law said during a private conversation in the garden. "My son-in-law is vulnerable, confused, too grateful for the attention he received. But that will pass, and when he fully regains consciousness, he will realize that you belong to completely different worlds. Don't take advantage of this temporary situation." But the businessman demonstrated a genuine curiosity about the woman who had cared for him with such dedication. During the physical therapy sessions, he asked questions about her life, about the challenges she faced, about the dreams she had mentioned during the one-sided conversations of the previous months. "You mentioned wanting to go back to school," he said one afternoon, as she organized the medications prescribed by the doctors. "About dropping out of college to take care of your daughter alone. Why haven't you ever tried to go back?" She stopped what she was doing, surprised by the question and the detailed memory he had of their conversations. "Because people like me don't have that luxury," she replied with brutal honesty. "Survival comes first. Dreams come later, and later never comes when you're always chasing the next rent check." His answer surprised her. Instead of discomfort or pity, she saw genuine admiration in his eyes. "You're stronger than you think," he said sincerely, "and smarter than this society allows you to be." Meanwhile, the brother intensified his efforts to destabilize the situation. He began to spread discreet rumors among the mansion's staff about a supposed scandalous affair between the vulnerable boss and the opportunistic maid. He whispered insinuations about financial motivations, about how certain people took advantage of fragile situations to gain advantages. The gossip reached the ears of the mother-in-law, who confronted the caregiver with direct accusations. "You're taking advantage of his confused state," she said in a cutting voice, "trying to create an emotional dependence to guarantee your financial stability. That's disgusting and won't be tolerated in this house." The tension intensified when the businessman began to question some inconsistencies he perceived in the accounts of his coma period. Documents that should have been in certain places had changed position, signatures on contracts that he didn't remember authorizing, small details that didn't make sense for someone who was supposedly unconscious the entire time. "Something isn't right," he confessed to the caregiver during a nighttime medication session. "My brother talks about business decisions I would never have made, contracts with companies I considered problematic. It's as if someone used my absence for their own benefit." She felt her heart race, remembering the documents about the sabotage she had discovered months before. The moral dilemma consumed her. Revealing the truth could save his fortune, but it could also put her own life at risk. The brother had proven himself capable of attempted murder. He certainly wouldn't hesitate to silence an inconvenient witness. The situation reached the breaking point when the businessman asked to personally review the company's financial documents during his absence. The brother tried to postpone the meeting, claiming that he wasn't yet sufficiently recovered to deal with complex matters, but the insistence grew with each passing day. "Tomorrow I want all the financial reports from the last 6 months on my desk," the businessman declared with the authority he was quickly regaining. "And I want to understand every decision that was made on my behalf." That night she barely slept, knowing that the final confrontation was approaching. The ambitious brother wouldn't allow his charade to be discovered without a fight, and she was right in the middle of a war that could destroy not only fortunes, but lives. When dawn arrived, she made a decision that would change the fate of everyone in the mansion. She entered the office before sunrise, when the mansion was still sleeping in absolute silence. Her hands trembled as she opened the secret drawer where she had found the sabotage documents months before. She knew she was risking everything: her job, her safety, perhaps even her life, but she could no longer live with the weight of the secret she carried. Carefully, she arranged all the evidence on the desk. The original mechanical reports proving the sabotage, the technical photographs of the cut breaks, the documents showing the suspicious financial transfers during the Coma period. Each paper was a piece of the puzzle that would reveal the truth about the ambitious brother. When the businessman came down for breakfast, still leaning on a cane due to muscle weakness, he found the evidence waiting for him. His eyes widened as he processed what he saw, and for a moment the silence in the office was deafening. "Where did you find this?" he asked in a tense voice, flipping through the documents with growing disbelief. "During the storm that left the mansion without power," she replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I found everything hidden behind the bookcase. Your brother thought he had destroyed the evidence, but he kept copies, probably to protect himself or blackmail someone in the future." The businessman read each line with meticulous attention, his expression hardening as the magnitude of the betrayal was revealed. It wasn't just an attempted murder, but an elaborate embezzlement scheme that had lasted for months. The brother had used his forged signature to authorize million-dollar transfers to personal accounts, sold important company shares below market value to companies he secretly controlled, and diverted investment funds to applications that benefited only his own interests. "He stole almost half of the company's net worth," he murmured, quickly calculating the financial damage. "If I hadn't woken up, in a few months there would be nothing left. My own family would have been impoverished because of his greed." At that moment, hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway. The brother had arrived earlier than usual, probably nervous about the prospect of the financial review that had been demanded. When he entered the office and saw the documents scattered on the desk, his face lost all color. "You don't understand," he stammered, desperately trying to find a plausible explanation. "I was protecting the business, making difficult decisions that you couldn't make. All of this can be explained if you give me a chance." But the businessman had already moved from the initial shock to a controlled fury that was even more intimidating than any emotional outburst. "Protecting," he repeated in a dangerously calm voice. "You sabotaged my car, tried to kill me, and then systematically stole everything our family worked for generations. And you call that protection?" The confrontation that followed was devastating. Cornered and with no way out, the brother finally confessed everything. The sabotage had been planned for months, motivated by envy and the belief that he deserved more than he had inherited. He had hired a corrupt mechanic to alter the brakes, hoping that the accident would look like a fatality related to the businessman's risky habits. "You always had everything," he exploded in a moment of despair. "The father's recognition, control of the business, everyone's respect. I was just the shadow, the less favorite brother who would never be anything. When you fell into a coma, I finally had the chance to prove that I could be a better manager than you." The mother-in-law, who had arrived, attracted by the raised voices, collapsed upon hearing the confession. The family betrayal hit her like a physical blow, and she needed to sit down to avoid falling. "How could you do this to your own blood?" she whispered, looking at the son she had raised as if he were a stranger. The consequences were swift and relentless. The businessman immediately contacted his lawyers and the police, providing all the necessary evidence to prosecute the brother for attempted murder and embezzlement. Within hours, arrest warrants were issued, and the ambitious brother was taken into custody, his desperate apologies echoing through the corridors of the mansion. In the days that followed, as the family dealt with the scandal and the recovery of the stolen assets, the businessman turned to the woman who had been the key to discovering the truth. His gratitude went far beyond the professional. She had risked everything to protect him, even knowing that she could face terrible reprisals. "You saved not only my life, but the entire future of my family," he said during a private conversation in the garden. "And you did it without expecting anything in return, just because it was the right thing to do." The intensity in his eyes made her tremble inside. During all those months caring for him, she had developed feelings that went far beyond compassion, but she had never dared to expect reciprocity. Now, seeing the way he looked at her, she felt a dangerous hope growing in her chest. "There's something I want to propose to you," he continued, taking her hands gently. "Not as employer and employee, but as two people who have gone through something extraordinary together." What he offered surpassed all the dreams she had secretly harbored. He not only declared his feelings, but proposed a future together that included financial support so that she could resume her studies, complete medical care for her elderly mother, and a new life where her daughter would have all the opportunities that she herself had never had. The mother-in-law, initially resistant to the idea of a relationship between them, was gradually won over by the honesty and determination of the woman who had saved her family. "You have proven to have more character than many people who were born in this house," she admitted during a difficult conversation. "Maybe I misjudged what really matters in a person." 6 months later, in an intimate ceremony held in the mansion's gardens, they were married, surrounded only by the people who really mattered. She wore a simple but elegant dress, and he had fully recovered both physically and emotionally from the traumas of the accident and family betrayal. During the ceremony, when they exchanged vows that they had written personally, he spoke about how her voice had been his anchor during the darkest months, how her stories had kept his soul connected to the world of the living. She spoke about how caring for him had taught her that true love knows no social barriers, that the courage to do what is right is always worth it, even when the path is frightening. The story that had begun with injustice and hopelessness turned into a journey of redemption and true love. He fulfilled all his promises. She resumed her studies in business administration. Her mother received the best medical treatment available, and her daughter grew up in an environment of love and infinite opportunities. Years later, when they told their story to close friends, they always emphasized that it was not the money or the assets that had united them, but the discovery that two souls can connect deeply regardless of external circumstances. The kiss that had awakened him from the coma became a symbol of how love can be the most powerful force to heal wounds that seemed impossible to heal.